Hey everyone, this is Lex from coachup.sg. For those who don't know me or CoachUp, let me do a brief introduction first. With CoachUp, we have about 20 years of combined experience in living, working, and running in startup environment. Our experience spans between Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, and as well Europe. We specialize in bringing method to the chaos. We've been in startups long enough to know it can be messy, it can be challenging, it can be daunting or rewarding. We've been there long enough and we realize that there is very little structured learning in startups. And that's where we come in. So what we've done is we developed a bunch of different courses that we know will provide crucial value to startups. These are DISC, Self-Deception. This is a course that we're still developing. It's relating to how leadership usually, let's say, is in their head a little bit too often, and how we can get out of our heads and actually drive the organization forward. Building high trust teams, which today's topic is actually a module of, and overcoming negativity in the workplace. We also provide individual coaching services. These include career coaching and leadership coaching. Career coaching, we help people level up as well as finding their own direction, potentially in a different company. Leadership coaching, we ask the leader to craft their leadership vision, and together with that leader, we will bring that vision to life. All of the coaches at CoachUp hold ICF, NLP, and DISC certificates. We're also in the process of setting up our own certified ICF leadership coaching training. That means that in a matter of days, you can actually obtain your first ICF certificate. Later, we will also roll out NLP certified coaching under the ABNLP, the American Board of Neuro-Linguistics. Now, let's be honest, it is inevitable to not feel some sense of discomfort. So even especially in the best teams, they experience quite some discomfort, and that's perfectly fine. If you focus on the best outcome, you will be at odds with people. And that is the key to talking about this whole issue of conflict. You talk about the best outcome, not about what somebody did or how somebody did this or how somebody can do that better. So here's an example of an imaginary person called Catherine. So imagine this. Catherine is leading an operations team. They're in charge of, let's say, last mile logistics. Last mile logistics is obviously somewhat of a stressful environment because it's about getting stuff on the right place at the right time, and dealing with multiple stakeholders, the receiver, the driver, the shipper, etc. But the team was afraid of having conflict. So they avoided tough questions like, why is it late? What is the problem? How did it actually arise? Like, what is the underlying root cause of you, my friend, always getting your parcels at the doorstep of our customers too late? So when you don't ask the real questions, you do not get the real answers. And if you don't get the real answers, you're never going to elevate your decision-making to become decent, good, great, or fantastic. So let's say our imaginary person, Catherine, in this example, understood like, hey, I need to make these people comfortable with having a productive conflict dialogue so that we can actually address the underlying causes and face the conflict head on. So as a result of being able to do that, decision-making improves because you have everyone's opinions, you build a more open team environment, and people start to embrace conflict as part of the growth journey. Now, imagine that you have this conflict and that at the end of the day, you are still not at odds with your colleagues. You actually had a conflict, you addressed it, there was a productive solution. That alone, that one event changes your mind about how you think about having this conflict with your coworkers in the first place. So what are some common barriers to conflict? Why do teams struggle with being at odds with each other? Now, one of the biggest barriers is often organizational culture. Many workplaces find it inappropriate if you are at odds with one another. They find it unprofessional. So overall, it doesn't look good on you. Then there's a lack of personal discomfort because let's be fair. How often do you go out just today I'm going to go outside and create some conflict with somebody. Well, that doesn't happen very often because we humans are programmed to seek harmony and balance because that equals safety. So that's on the personal discomfort. Lastly, oftentimes you get rewarded for having a lot of friends in the workplace. If you're a good manager or a good leader, it means that people want to follow you. It means that people like you, that your influence in the organization spreads further and wider. And that is some of the reasons why it's hard to actually go out and have productive conflict with people. So why is productive conflict so important? And what can I do about it? Now, fret not, at the end of this video, we'll get 2 ways to actually stimulate having healthy conflict as opposed to avoiding conflict. So unlike destructive conflict, which is often rooted in ego, personal agendas, or competition with one other or another department, productive conflict focuses on openly debating and addressing issues to uncover all different perspectives that lead into, well, having this challenge in the first place. So it's about challenging each other to get the best possible result as opposed to challenging each other so that I win. Very different perspective to all of it. So to do this properly, you will need to have some level of vulnerability-based trust within the team. In the previous video, we actually talked about that. So if you haven't yet, you can just watch this one. And after this, go back to the dysfunction number 1, a lack of trust. Because when team members trust each other sufficiently, they're able to have an honest discussion with each other and actually address the underlying issues of the conflict as opposed to the superficial issues that we think we are talking about. Being able to be somewhat vulnerable with each other creates a safe space in which you can explain your inner workings. So to kick things off, let's start with what we mean by the fear of conflict. Basically what it means is, well, teams are afraid of conflict. They avoid debate, they avoid disagreement, which clearly sounds like a very nice, peaceful, happy, fluffy place to work in. But it also means that you actually reach, let's call it artificial agreement. Yeah, you say, but just doesn't feel right. Now, as an example, have you ever said, yes, okay, sweetheart, I will do the dishes tonight, but deep inside you're like, I didn't want to do the dishes at all. Now that is basically where this whole module is about. It's about the fear of actually having a productive conflict to get to a better outcome for the entire team, as opposed to the backing away from conflict, avoiding it at all cost, leading to mediocre outcomes. Now, even the best teams in the world experience discomfort when it comes to conflict. It's conflict by nature will bring a level of discomfort. And as I said, we're programmed to avoid it all the time. But the key with avoiding this sense of discomfort is to not talk about people, but talk about the issue at hand. If you're worried about how outsiders might feel about the discussion you have with your team, guess what? That's probably a good sign, right? It means that outsiders feel like, hey, this is unfiltered, this is quite direct, but it's precisely this dialogue that actually drives the success. It is the focus on the outcomes, not on the individual deeds of a person. So finding the balance between artificial harmony and destructive conflict is obviously critical. Teams avoid conflict completely, creating a false sense of peace. On the other hand, you have arguments fueled by, let's say, ego or personal attacks. So the ideal balance lies slightly left of destructive conflict. There's enough tension to bring out the best of ideas, but not so much that the attacks become personal. And yes, sometimes you'll cross that line, but when you handle that correctly, recovering from those moments build even greater trust. Earlier in this recording, I mentioned that in order to resolve conflict productively, you need to have some level of vulnerability-based trust. I outlined a small exercise here. It's basically an open discussion. It allows the teams to share what they feel and think about conflict from their perspectives. We do this so that we give them an opportunity to be vulnerable with one another. Now, things you could discuss could be how someone dealt with personal conflict or professional conflict in the past in a different company. Additionally, you could talk about how my cultural background or my unique experiences shape the way I deal with conflict. The goal of this exercise, which usually takes between 30 to 60 minutes, depending on how many people are in your team, the goal is very simple and get people to open up and be more vulnerable. Now, does it make sense for you to every time when you feel a little bit of conflict arising, quick, go, let's go into the meeting room. Let's talk about all of our past experiences. No, of course not. The previous exercise, the open dialogue, is literally there to establish a ground level of vulnerability-based trust based on the experiences, based on the cultural background. When conflict arises, you want to do a session of conflict norming. What does that mean? That means we're going to set up the rules of engagement to have a productive conflict. Typically, these involve a whole set of rules around things such as no personal attacks, no blaming, no justifying of your own actions, and a whole long list of other items that we will obviously share in the physical workshop. However, for the purpose of this video, we'll just keep it somewhat short. In addition to those rules, team members get to share their personal preferences for conflict. This sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it is actually a thing. If you really dig down into, hey, how do I feel about conflict and how do I usually engage with conflict? What do I like and what do I not like about that? That is actually what we want you to write down. So once we have established their preferences for conflict, we're going to talk about those rules or those preferences as a group, set up the framework within which we can have productive conflict. And then after that, we are going to commit to this framework. That basically gives us the rules of engagement of healthy conflict within a team. It also establishes what is allowed, what is not allowed, and who is the referee whenever conflict arises. The next step is to actually go through the conflict resolution exercise. In this video, we're not going to go deep dive into what this model looks like and how we can apply it. And essentially, right, see a recent or chosen issue that you as a team want to resolve, and then apply this model. Now, without going into all much too depth, what usually happens is that before a conflict can be resolved, before we get to the root and the inner problem of the conflict, we have all these outer layers to peel away, basically like an onion. Now, these involve information. I didn't know this, or this is how I think about it. This is my perspective, right? That's an outer layer we need to cut out before we can get to the root cause. Other outer layers could be environmental, or I didn't have the space, or there were office politics involved, or whatever it is that prevented you from doing well. And lastly, relationship. Oftentimes, right, if the conflict is in the middle, that means there's an opinion here and an opinion here. Now, relationships are also two-sided. So what happens is we have the informational strips need to strip away. We have the environmental layers need to strip away, and we have the relationship layers need to strip away. Oftentimes, people could be at odds with each other. People could have sort of, let's call it legacy feelings that still need to be resolved before we can get to the root of the conflict. And then lastly, there might be obstacles that have to do with the individual. This could be stuff like experience, self-esteem, or just generally emotional intelligence or actual IQ. Often, it could also be stuff around the values of the motives that somebody hold that prevents them from doing the task properly. Now, again, in the actual workshop, we'll deep dive into this because this is a huge part of resolving the conflict. But for the purpose of this video, we'll keep it nice and short. So what are the things that you learned today? Before trying to resolve any conflict, make sure there is a base level of trust in your team. Get them in a room, sit down, and yeah, it's a weird conversation to have. Hey, how do you like your conflict? Sunny side up? Talk about it. Talking about conflict in the first place makes conflicts less scary. Get the preferences, get the consensus, and build the framework in which productive conflict may arise. Once you have that, you literally have your MOU for dealing with conflict within the team. Now, what happens is you'll see that people start to get more comfortable with each other because they can show this other side of them that they no longer have to hold back within them. That actually causes a lot of these disgruntled feelings. You also see that your team is more engaged in meetings because you can now speak out without having to be afraid that you're out of line. You'll also notice better decision making, and that will lead to better results. So thank me for that later. For now, leave some comments on how you're going to apply this in your company. Follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, and yeah, let us know, right? If you need any help with resolving conflict, you can reach us via the website. There's a contact form on the Contact Us page. Just pop a message. We'll respond within 24 hours, and we're happy to come into your company and help you resolve the conflicts you have with your team, set the ground rules, and make sure that you guys are ready to thrive. If you don't want team coaching, we can also provide these workshops, of which this is actually just a preview for the entire company or for your team specifically. All right. That's it for today. Cheers.